In today's photo deconstruction, I am going to break down this image. I'm going to show you how I use continuous lights, specifically Nanlites, to create this super saturated fantasy fashion image. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here. And as you know, I love slices of light and super saturated color and the control that I get in the studio. But for the longest time, I've used primarily strobes, and I still love strobes, but I've started to integrate continuous light into my work a lot more, and I am for several reasons. Now, first of all, as a fashion photographer, and when I do commercial work, a lot of times the clients want me to be able to capture stills and motion at the same time, and we don't have enough time in the day to switch between strobes and continuous lights. So now, a lot of times I'm setting up the continuous lights and capturing all of the assets with that. The other reason I've been using continuous lights a lot more is they've just gotten better. In the past, there wasn't as much output and they didn't have as much control or modifiers. And a lot of that has changed. What you can get out of relatively inexpensive continuous lights is pretty amazing. And so that's what I did for this image. I'm actually using 4 different continuous lights. All of these are Nanlites, and this was actually created at one of my intensive workshops. The theme was color, and it was put on in conjunction with Nanlites. So they gave me a lot of support for this, and I got to play around with some tools I hadn't used before, and they were fantastic. So I want to take you behind the scenes real quick. I want to show you how I achieved the lighting, the different tools I used, my camera settings, and then I want to show you it was captured in camera versus post, because that's often a little bit of a mystery that we don't get to see in other photographers' work. All right, so let's take a look at the behind the scenes. Now you can see already that I'm using 4 different lights. All of these are continuous. And by the way, if you don't know what continuous means, it basically means that they're on continuously, unlike with strobes that are just a flash of light, just a brief illumination. And so another benefit is that with continuous lights, it's what you see is what you get. And that's really easy to figure out your exposure. All right, so what you can see is I've got a main light, 2 fill lights on either side, like so 2 total, and then a beam of light overhead. All right, so let's break it down. Our first light over on the right-hand side is a Nanlite Forza 60 with a projection attachment. So this is going to allow us to have little beams of light. If you have seen my work and you know my brand, you know that I have partnered with Westcott to create the Westcott optical spot. I use this very often when I want slices of light on the face or textures on the background. This is the Nanlite continuous light equivalent. So I've got the projection attachment on there, and I'm using it to light the center of the subject's face with just a little bit of white light, because then I'm going to be adding additional colors. But I also have a second exact same setup, the Nanlite Forza 60C in this case with a projection attachment. And the C is the key here. This is the color. It allows me to do full RGB. Like I can choose any color that I want, and I can adjust the hue, the saturation, the brightness of it. And so this too has a projection attachment, and I actually have it up over top of the background pointed downward. And so the projection is giving me that beam of light over her head. But because it's the 60C, I could pick whatever color I wanted. And I don't know why, the past year I really liked this super saturated kind of lime green. And so that's what we chose for this shot. All right, so we've got projection attachment main, overhead light from above with another projection attachment. And then on each side of the subject, I have a fill light. So on the left-hand side, you can see I have a Nanlite PavoTube turned to red. PavoTubes are these long, narrow tubes. They come in different lengths. You can get 8 inches and 2 feet and 4 foot. So I believe this is the 4 foot that I have here. And there's one other adjustment. In front, there's a grid. A grid acts just like grids in any light, like a grid in a beauty dish or a softbox. It reduces the spill of light. It controls it. It contains it. And so originally when I put up the red light, I didn't want it spilling on the background. So I added this grid to give me a little more control. So it's primarily hitting my subject. So I have that on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, I added the blue fill. And so same thing, the PavoTube 2 foot with the grid. So I've got these beautiful colors, and it's giving me red, green, and blue as my main colors. So we're going with primary colors here, and then just a little bit of white light on the center of the subject's face. Now for this image, I was shooting with the Canon R5 and the Canon RF 24-70 2.8 lens. This lens is really sharp. It's great for when I'm shooting wider images, like wider focal lengths, and I want to be able to shoot with a 2.8 aperture and have some flexibility. Now there is a downside of continuous lights. Continuous lights do not have as much power output as strobes do. They simply don't, unless you're spending a ton of money. And so I very often with continuous lights, I'm shooting really wide apertures, and much higher ISOs. And so even though I am, as you can see here, shooting at f4, I was doing that because in the class I wanted to make sure that everybody could shoot at my camera settings. But if I was shooting this myself, I probably would have dropped down to 2.8, allowing more light in. And so you can see at f4, I'm at ISO 1250. So again, I have to pump up my ISO quite a bit, let in a lot of light in order for it to be bright enough because they are not really strong output. All right, so that's the behind the scenes of it, but I want to show you what I captured. So we're popping over here. This is the final image that you can see, but let's actually go to the raw. All right, so there's a couple things you'll notice about the raw. First of all, it's really, really hazy. And that's because I was using a haze machine. There was a haze machine in the room putting these really fine particles that what it does is it decreases contrast. It makes it look a little less sharp. It literally makes it hazier. The reason I wanted that though is the haze is why you see the beam of light from above. Without the haze you would see it, but it would not be nearly as defined. Because the haze is being backlit and from above and it's coming down towards camera, it really creates a really defined cone of light, which I think is beautiful. So looking at this, there's not, I mean, it still looks cool out of camera, but I definitely wanted to play around with clarity and dehaze and increasing contrast. And that's just one of the side effects of using haze or a fog machine. You really do need to add more of that contrast and detail back in post. So this is what was raw. And then here is what I did with my camera raw adjustments. Specifically, I did this in Capture One. So I pumped up the saturation like crazy. I increased the clarity, the contrast, and the dehaze. I also brightened it up about a stop. And so you can see there is a ton of contrast and pop to this image. One of the things I really love as well is you can see that her dress is reflecting some of the colors, even the light bouncing off of the floor. And one of the other things that I didn't mention is that you see in this shot that there's these kind of painterly blurs around the edge. That was captured in camera. That is using something called a center field split diopter. There are many different brands that make them. For example, there's a company, Freewell, that makes them. Tiffin's, they call it a letterbox diopter or they call it a slit diopter. And basically what it means is there's two magnifying glasses on either side of the filter that screws into the front of the camera, and then there's an open spot in the middle. So the open spot is where you can focus and it's clear, and then on the edges it blurs, which is exactly what you see in this shot. In fact, you even see a little kind of ghost image of her on the left-hand side. That was all in camera. I just needed to increase the contrast in order to be able to see it. So looking at this, there's not that much that needs to be retouched. Maybe a little bit of smoothness in the skin, but I think the biggest thing I found distracting was the blue fill light that was reflecting off of her hands. I wanted to darken that down and maybe clean up a couple little pieces of reflection on the dress. So here's raw. Here's my TIFF. So this is my color grading and tonal adjustments, and this is the retouch. So you can see it was pretty close in camera with just a few adjustments. And so working with continuous light, you know, the benefit is I could see as I was setting it up exactly what the result would be. And what's nice about it is when you're using color, whether it's strobes or continuous lights, a lot of the concepts follow through all of it. The way that I work with color, the way that I create beams of light. Now that there are better tools and better lights out there, I can take a lot of my knowledge that I've built up over the years through strobes and apply it to continuous lights. All right, so I hope you guys have enjoyed this photo deconstruction, this breakdown. And just a couple of things. This was created at one of my workshops, so if you want to join, be sure to check the links in the description below or go to my website and specifically go to the workshop section. I do these workshops in small groups, 10, 12, 14 people, and you have an opportunity to shoot setups like this. And so I walk you through all of my creative choices from the styling to the lighting and even color grading. So if you'd like to have that hands-on, be sure to check those out. And of course, if you want to see the gear that I talked about in this video, I put that in the description below as well. And you can visit adorama.com if you want to pick any of these up. Thank you guys, and I'll see you next time.